All right. Hello. So this is gonna be my first video back. Um and for a long time I was like I don't really know what I want to do because like there's like a huge saturation of content out there that's free or paid in terms of you know doing what we do, right? Concept art. And yeah, I felt like I didn't want to add to the noise. I just wanted to do something that was maybe more specific to what I do that isn't particularly just how I draw or how I paint because I mean all that stuff is anybody can learn how to do that. Um, and it's not particularly special. So I thought about, well, okay, I work on Valorant. Is there anything on Valorant that we're doing that's particularly different or that I've learned? And I've definitely learned a lot over the years. And so I want to talk today about two topics. One is going to be designing maps from here, basically the holistic view, right? Like when we take a look at the thematic of a map from this perspective. And then the next thing I want to talk about is once we've established what the big themes are of our map, and we're happy with the overall like sections, like this section is going to be this thing, then mid is going to be another, and then the right side is going to be its own thing. Once we're happy with that, how do we then take that and oh, I'm dead. um, how do we take that and then design from player space, because player space is going to be the biggest challenge, right? So hold on, let's pause this. I'm getting phased, bro. Okay, anyways, so again, I'm not going to be playing Valorant during this game or during this video, but once we're here, right, we've established the major beats from the top view. How do we design from here, right? Because again, when you design something, what I have found is that there's a there's a big disconnect between designing for a 2D image, which is what everybody learns how to do. The whole focus of concept art for many years has been how do I make this picture look good? And that's fine because if you work in animation or film or whatever, right, where the final product is a 2D image, that works. But as soon as I am designing for something where I can move around it and I can go inside of it and I can look at it from this angle, right? Same building, different angle. The problems that we need to solve are vastly different, and the approach that we need to take for that issue changes. Okay. Sorry if you heard that. Um, so let's jump first into the designing for top downs, okay? Because that's going to inform how we then design for player space views. So, first off, we've got a top-down map, right? This isn't any map in particular in Valorant. If you can actually figure it out, then props to you. But this is an in-progress shot from an old map. Um, so I like to think that these top-down maps are almost like puzzle pieces, right? Which is why I have this laid out over here. And our job as concept artists in this phase, when we get the block out, when it's just the block out, no art or anything, is to make sure that those puzzle pieces fit together. Um, and that's in a couple of different ways. We need to make sure that it fits together narratively, thematically, and then after those two things work, the narrative and all that, then we need to make sure that the puzzle pieces fit compositionally in the 3D space. Okay, so how do we resolve the first two? Okay, if we take a look at like Pearl, for example, Pearl's got a couple of different themes. It's got the nightlife side, which is based off of like Barrio Alto, and then it's got the historic side, and then it's got the kingdom element. Okay, so if you look at this top down right here, we've got This side right here, all the blue roof stuff is the historic side. And then we've got the red roof stuff over here, which is the nightlife side. And then we've got the kingdom element right here. Okay. So we got like three strong themes. Okay. And now within those three themes, because you can lay those out this way, right? On the top-down map, you can lay them out as like, okay, this is the historic side, H for historic. This is the uh, nightlife side, N for nightlife, and then this right here is the kingdom side, right? And so that makes sense, right? Visually from a top-down view, we can understand how the layout works, okay? Not jumping into any 3D element at all. We can then decide, okay, well, this is kind of the rough idea that each of those things look like. Now, this is from Juliet uh, or Sunset. Okay. We've got in Sunset, we did three themes as well. We've got the kind of the downtown LA vibe, which is one. Then we've got in mid, this is kind of like the more it's a warmer style. It's got like markets and like the Spanish style architecture, things like that. And then on B, we've got the what is it called? The Art Deco side. So each side here is very specific and feels different from each other. Okay, that's the whole point. Now, next, I'm not saying that you have to do these in a particular order. Typically, though, what we would do is this, where this is from Brian Yam, but you take that top down, and then we do these kind of quick sketches over them. Um, so this is from Breeze. Uh, what you'll see here is that you've got this theme here, which is based off of this reference, and then you've got this center theme here, which is, you know, I guess based off of this reference here, all the docks and kind of these like shanty buildings. And then on the right side here, you've got the shipwreck with the natural like rocks and environment. Okay, so you've got three different kind of biomes for this map, right? And again, it's important to establish this early on because this gives the loose roadmap for the concept artist to work off of when we move into the player space. Okay. Um, Now, once we've got this, we can then establish loosely what we want the narrative flow to be for each section. So we know within this section we want, okay, maybe this is like a castle section, and maybe this castle section can flow nicely into this like mid market, right? And then this market kind of flows into like the shipwreck and the beach, etc., and the docks. Maybe there's like another, I don't know what, right? But basically, what we want to do is fit the quote unquote puzzle pieces together so that, you don't have something where you've got a castle, like you've got a castle that runs right into like a junkyard or something like that, right? Because those two themes wouldn't fit well together. You want to make sure that the flow of the thematic between these two blends fits well. Okay. That's the idea. We have to like stitch these together and in a way that feels appropriate, right? Because if you don't, then we end up with these like really janky and jarring transitions between spaces, right? Because again, it's not enough that we've laid these out. We need to blend them together now, almost like in Photoshop when you're using the smudge brush, right? We need to make sure that these things feel nice. Okay. All right. So we've established our high level narrative blocks. We've loosely established our transitions for like what the actual spaces within those blocks are. And so again, if that's not clear, it's like we've got our big block, but like within that block, we've got a story space here and a story space here. And the story space within these two spaces blend together nicely because the narratives of like what they are feel appropriate, right? So they stitch together well. And now once we do that, then we can move into the 3D element. Okay. What do I want the big POIs on my map to be? Okay. So if you look at Pearl, we've got this POI in mid of the statue holding the ball. Obviously, there's a huge POI, which is you can't actually see, but it goes above the player space, and then up here there's like a giant, dome thing. And then we've got the vista out here, which is also like has a really cool element of a vista that's been separated behind the dome. That's a POI. And then you've got the cathedral, right? So like we've established what the big POIs, um, maybe roughly we want them to be. Okay. Now, not all the time is it going to be super clear what that's going to be early on. Um, but if you can have a loose idea, then it really helps, right? So we've got the hotel or the apartment building, and then we've got this giant kingdom, almost, I don't even know what this is, like train station building, or not a train station building. I think it's just like an office building. Um, but basically, how this relates to the puzzle idea is that like you can start to extrude these things loosely to get an idea, right? It's like, okay, maybe I want a POI over on B site, or I want the POI, maybe I want it to be like this, and then this one is like really big, and then maybe it's flanked by like what this, right? That's the composition of the map I want. It's not super important to figure this out. You kind of actually figure out as you're doing the next phase, but it's an interesting idea to think of as like, it's a way that you could approach it, where it's like, I want this section of the map higher. I know I want this section of the map higher than this section, so what does that really mean, right? Okay, so that covers the high level, like when we're looking at the map from a top-down view, right? Like again, just to recap, we establish our high level themes, right? And then next, once we've figured out our high level themes, we figure out the stories within those themes, and then how those things blend together between the sections. Okay, and those fit nicely as a narrative. Um, and then after that, we can loosely decide what we want our big POIs to be. Okay. Now, the next section that I'm going to talk about is designing compositions for player space. Again, when we're down here, how do we approach designing this so that it's the most effective workflow for all the artists that have to work on it, right? Because um, if I give a little breakdown about all the work that goes into this, it's not just I make a sketch and it gets built, because all the modeling has to get done, the texturing has to get done, all the blends, and then also um, any sort of sound that might emanate from it, and then all the VFX work. And so I can't tell you how many how many hours probably get lost on VFX alone when you take something like this and you have to like move it or change it or whatever, right? So like there's huge cost loss when you have to make changes because you didn't approach something the correct way. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about this particular example. So I'm going to pull up some images here, and I want to start with this one actually. So this was done by Adrian Bush. Beautiful image. It shows most of the map from like an aerial view. It gives us a very strong idea of like what the look of the map is going to be. All of that, right? Great image. Um, but what you'll notice is that this center tower is different than what we have in the end, and that's because the lotus flower, is over here. And so that was in the map and like that for a long time. And so if I actually go back to the map here and I go over here, you'll notice that those, um, we have this still here, right? It's still a remnant of it because we put in the work, but we didn't want to, we couldn't redesign this entire section because we wanted to change the location of the flower. Okay. So we kept the roots and we just had them basically wrap around this from over here. Um, so going back to it, why did we do this? Um, the reason is because when you looked at from player view, uh, the flower and the tower together, it created a compositional hierarchy that was very confusing. Um, when you would look at it from like over here, you'd want to look at the flower and then you'd also want to look at the tower, and it was competing too heavily. Um, and so to solve that, I said, well, instead of doing separate, again, here's a separate view. It's kind of hard to tell from the scale, but like that's the same flower and it's attached on the backside of this. Instead of having the two things, and you also notice even the tower is not even really here yet. Instead of having the two things, why don't we just merge them into one focal point? That would solve a lot of the compositional stuff that we're having issues with. But unfortunately, it creates a lot of rework. Um, so that was the main idea. And so if you take a look uh, at these screenshots here, I'll just run through these. Okay. Actually, here, I'll start with this one. So this was the concept. I basically just I raised the tower so that it was the height of it was like super tall so we can see it from around the map, right? I raised it up and then I had the flower just wrap around it. So this is the concept that started this whole big change, right? And then so you'll see these screenshots from Kevin Brunt, the principal artist at the time. You can see it from here. You can see it from the spawn. You can see it even from over here. I'm pretty sure even at player space because he's not at ground level, but you can still see it. And even on this side, the opposite side of the map. So pretty much from every angle of the map, you can see this thing now, and there's nothing else that competes for its attention. And then these are some additional like supporting sketches that were done, I think, by Mayhul or Andrew. But basically, these sketches just help to show the idea of how these things wrap around, and it's retaining the idea that it came from the original location, but it's just flowing this way. Okay. Um, all right, so that's one example. Again, I think so. The idea being is that we want to try our best to avoid the mistakes that, well, I guess I made by not using an efficient workflow to figure out the compositions early on. And so, like, how would we fix this? And so I'll show an example now, which I used a workflow later on to help fix this problem. Uh, and so I'll pull up again. This is from the same level. But if we look at this image here, all right, so this is the original A site. And so what you'll see is that there's a giant tree in the middle of the site, and the entire site is surrounded by walls, right? The problem with this is that it creates a very claustrophobic uh, site, right? Like when you walk up to it and then you see this giant tree and you're flanked by giant walls, you feel like there's nowhere to go. It feels very cramped, right? And so I brought this up and I said, well, what if we just move this off the actual A site, right? We put it somewhere else. And so we did some prototyping and we came up with a couple of different ideas. And I didn't approach this by doing sketches like this because this is actually what got us into this problem in the first place. Um, I did it by using 3D. And so I started to prototype these ideas out roughly, like what I wanted to do. Um, and so in this idea, I thought, okay, well, what if they carved into the rock, right? Because that was the idea for part of this map is that the architecture is actually carved out of the rock. Um, and I placed the tree up on this hill, and around it, they have these like temple-like structures that are flanking it, right? So that was one idea. We thought it was cool. I thought it was cool, but I don't think that it went far enough in trying to solve the issue that we had. Now, what you'll notice too is uh, with this idea, right? So I showed it from the top view, and I'm showing it from the different angles, like just roughly of what it would look like compositionally from around different sections of the map, right? So like when you're on site, this is what it would look like. The other way entering all the entrances to site I showed, right? And so this isn't like a pretty sketch or anything, but it's like a functional way to get your idea across and make sure that your compositions look good from almost every angle. Now we didn't go with this idea. The idea that we ended up going with was this idea. So, print. When we are looking at our reference, there's these wells that are that they have basically, and we wanted to bring that idea into the map, right? Because we didn't have that anywhere. And so we thought, okay, well, why don't we kind of just duplicate the space that we have on site, kind of extend it out and build out one of these wells, and then put the tree on top of that, right? So basically the idea is that the water here is helping to grow the tree that's on top of this centerpiece. Okay. And so with Brian Yam's help and my modeling, we kind of prototyped that out. So like he did this sketch for the idea, right? So there's like a broken wall here now with some vines growing over it, and then the tree over the centerpiece. And then I modeled that, or roughly modeled it so that we can hand it over to the 3D team. And then a little breakout of like again that tree that I did just like superimposed over it. And so in the final result, what you'll see is pretty much that, right? So this we have the vines, they break over the wall. We've got the tree growing on top of this thing, and then all these other surrounding buildings, right? Cool. And then this is how it looks from all the different angles, etc. All right, so that's again just like another example of like how we can use 3D to help solve our problems more efficiently than maybe a 2D image could help, right? Uh, Next, I want to go to the most recent map that we did. And so I did this painting for the headquarters building on Abyss, which is out in the Vista. And if you've played the game, you may notice that it doesn't look like this anymore. Um, because at the time when I did this painting, it was a materials painting, but so again, I'm just kind of focusing on the lighting and the material look. But uh, the the composition of it is not great. And what I mean by that is when you we wanted this thing to feel really imposing, almost like like a giant castle basically. And it wasn't giving that feeling because it wasn't well, it just wasn't big enough, basically, was the theory. Um, and so our solution or the proposal that I did was, okay, well, what if we just took this thing and again, I'm just in the engine. I just like scaled it up like crazy. Um, and so that it actually breaks the silhouette of the top of the cave. And so it doesn't look like this in the end, but this is the idea, right? It's like you can see it from almost every angle on the map. So this is like in Spawn. This is again like different section of Spawn, right? Even from the other side of the map in the Spawn, you can see it breaking the silhouette, right? So pretty much like I accounted for every angle. Now you can just like really see it. It's like it hangs over everything in the map, right? Again, when we design compositions, we want to make sure that we are accounting for most of the angles, right? Like if we can satisfy maybe 80 to 90% of the angles and make them look good, then we're on the right path. Okay. And so I think the last thing that I want to show here is kind of this diagram where again we're going from like big like working from big to small. Um, and I think these examples are probably successful ones where we didn't have to do a lot of rework because of me using 3D in the beginning. All right, so uh, so this is big, right? Where we have the top-down sketch, and we know that we want this to be kind of the nightlife area, and then it moves into this like cathedral that's being worked on. Okay, all right, so we have that, and normally what a lot of people will do is they'll just jump right in and maybe do some sketches like this of some compositions that look cool. But for this cathedral, because it was so specific and I saw the reference that it was based off of, I wanted to make sure that one, it was authentic, two, that it merged and like it integrated well into the environment. So I felt that the best way to approach this was to use 3D. And so rather than going to this stage, the sketch, I took a step back and I literally built out the entire cathedral in 3D. And so when I did this and I handed it off to the principal artist, Bmart at the time, um, he was like, "Okay, great. This is perfect. It allows us to see it, right, and see if it's working." and we can just go from there, right? I don't have to guess and build it myself. He literally just took all the pieces and just put it in the game. Um, so we can go there, and then we can start to then we do the painting, and then we go and do the supporting sketches for like how it merges into the building next to it, and how on the other side it merges into this, right? And the different compositions for like all this stuff, right? And all the supporting reference that we've got, right? And then from there, we go in and we start doing player level stuff, right? We're at player level as like, I'm right, like this section right here. Okay, this is what this looks like, you know? And the buildings that lead up to the cathedral, this is what those look like. And then the last thing we do is start doing like the smallest props where on the buildings we've got, this kind of facade looking thing. And this is what sorry, all of these things, these like barricades that they're using for construction, right? That's what these are, the individual ones. And this little thing that's on top of the arch, right? That's what that looks like. But we can't get to that until once we've done all of this work and then the 3D stuff, we have to go down the line. Okay. And so using 3D really helped us to solve a lot of potential problems, right? Okay. The last one I want to talk about is, again, it's on Pearl, but it's actually the train, or the not the train, the metro station that runs in between the different domes that are out in the vista. So that's the idea, right? Is there's a station, and the trains like run between all the different ones that are outside. And so Brian did this sketch, which kind of like shows how it goes between the dome and the islands and all that other stuff, right? And then I did this kind of rough block out that also incorporates all the sketches we did, where it shows like how it connects to this generator thing, and then the pipes run through these and then attaches to like a building that's like over here, which is the Kingdom 2 building. So that's like this sketch right here would have attached into this building, right? And so this attachment point then goes out and connects here and does all this other stuff, right? Um, and then we go and do, right, the player level sketches. This is kind of what it's going to look like from actual, the scene level. And then after that, we figure out, okay, this is what the actual pipes kind of look like, each individual breakout thing. But yeah. So to recap, I think, well, I'm not going to recap the first stuff, but I think the important thing to take away from this is that when you're designing for 3D spaces, right? Try to incorporate 3D into the workflow. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do that. There's doing a sketch first and then using 3D to afterwards on your own end to figure out if your sketch works, or there's doing 3D first and then sketching on top of your 3D, which I think is more effective. That's just personal opinion, but again, using 3D somewhere in the pipeline to make sure that your designs are accounting for as much of the other places in your map, right? Because again, we don't want to provide more work for our 3D artists. All right. So in this section, I actually want to take a look at one of the maps that we've done and talk little bit about like where I think we could find areas to improve upon, and then show examples of how we can go about doing that. And so I want to take a look at this spawn in particular because I thought that it was a good opportunity to talk about how decisions that are made, um, maybe like in isolation or when you're doing them in just like a 2D form, could really affect and like snowball the compositions throughout the map. So if we take a look at the spawn right here, what you're going to notice is that they spawn in, players spawn in, and this is their first impression. Now they can choose to go right, and the composition over here is pretty simple. But if you choose to go left, we've got a lot of things going on. Notice that we've got a skateboard shop right here that's in the foreground. In the midground, we've got this like bar, and then we come around. Actually, before you even come around, You can see the theater right here, which is overlapping this like destroyed building back here, and then we've got the buildings in mid. And so there's like a ton of different layers going on. There's literally one, two, three, four, five layers that are overlapping each other, and they're pretty noisy. And so, we can take a look at I'll take a look at a little bit about how we approach doing this because I thought that that was also a little bit of a maybe like the cause that led to the way that it turned out. And so when I think back, we had one artist do the theater, we had one artist do just this chunk of this building right here. Another artist did this part, and then one did here. And so we've got and then we had another artist do this part of this building, and then I did this part. And so like if you think about how many artists worked just within these couple of sections, it's a lot, right? Um, and I think a better way to have done this or approach this is kind of like in a block method, right? Where almost like neighborhoods, right? If you know that this composition is really important to players, it maybe would have made sense to have one artist kind of tackle like this building, this one, and this, because they all kind of really intertwine and interact with each other in a pretty heavy manner, right? So rather than splitting up the work that way, it would have made sense to just have one person kind of handle most of it, and then have the other artists kind of come in and support and give critique and have their influence that way. Um, so yeah. So, anyways, a couple of other things too. I think okay, the issues one too much layering, right? Like this building, I think needs to come up, right? It needs to come up and cover this. This theater is competing with this too much. There's like two focal points, right? Um, and I think that's what happens when you have like something that gets concepted from right here, right? But then we have another thing that's getting concepted in an isolation, like from over here, right? And it's actually I don't even think this got concepted from that view. It got concepted from like I think it got concepted from over here, right? So you have this tower that got concepted from basically this view almost, right? Because this is kind of how we had to figure out the general layout. And then it's negatively impacting the composition of this. And so it's like, well, what's the true focal point, right? The true focal point is that this, right? That's the hero element. So the theater is going to have to kind of sacrifice itself and become a supporting element. Um, so how do we solve these issues, right? We have to change the composition. One, we change the way that we work. Two, we change the composition, and and we kind of have to make sure that all these things work cohesively together. Another thing too that I remember is like we make sure that uh, we design the buildings in context to what they are, right? And so, like for example, this building, I remember it got kind of concepted from like this angle, which is good if you're designing the interior space. And then I think it also got concepted kind of like from here or something. That's good for the interior space, but we need to realize that this particular building is just a supporting element. Like it's a compositional support for this building. And this too is like another supporting piece, right? So do these two buildings, like the shape of them, uh, support this thing, right? And I think it does, but it's just a note to make to think about, right? Is like even choosing the angle which you concept stuff from can really have an effect on the way that uh, it turns out in the end. Okay, so in the next section of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the block out of this, and I'm going to edit the block out so that it kind of addresses the notes that I think are causing the issues in the composition, right? And we're going to easily start to see how one issue and fixing one thing really could snowball into a bunch of different problems that show up, right? And even uh, surprisingly will show how changing some stuff actually fixes and makes some compositions better because we just didn't know that that was an option, right? So I'll see you in the next section.
Okay, so this last section, I want to talk about what I changed here to try to make this composition better. Um, and so again, the source of the problem was that, like we said in the last videos, was there's too many overlapping elements from the building here, the building here, and this, right? Especially when you go down to this view, right? It just gets super busy. And it doesn't have an order of importance, right? Where when we look at the composition, we're supposed to know what the thing is that we're looking at and what the focal point is, right? Like the focal point could be the theater, it could be the tower in the back, but then we also have the skate shop in front. So it's like, what are we supposed to look at? Our eye gets jumbled and we don't know what's going on. Okay, so in order to fix that, again, we need to approach it from like a whole area. Um, all right, so let me go over to my 3D view. And the easiest way to kind of resolve that is to just like raise this building up. And so that's what I did here, right? It's like clearly now this is what we're supposed to look at. Like when we go over here, um, this is the only thing. Okay. I think I raised this up a little bit in my changes, but I would actually say it might be better to just leave it as it was because I kind of like that there's no peak at the focal point yet. Um, but okay, at the very least, there's a clear thing that we're supposed to be drawn towards, right? It's the skate shop. Boom, you stop here, and then you go through. Now, the next thing that I did was I shortened the theater. Um, now, the reason I did that is because I wanted it to be hidden behind this, right? Like uh there's no thing that you're gonna get confused about like where you're supposed to look until you get to this point and it's like boom, okay. Now we have the theater and then behind the theater like something is happening, right? And these two things are linked by the fact that they are stylistically the same, right? They're both the Art Deco like old style architecture. Okay, so so even though they're uh both kind of like important in the composition. This one definitely will stand out. You can't see the VFX here, but that definitely would be the thing. And they're linked to get together story-wise by the architecture. Okay. So another thing to notice about this change is that it still retains the character of the theater, where it's like we have this stacking kind of pyramid language, but it doesn't need to be as tall as we had it, right? Like, in my opinion, the theater that we have here is a bit unnecessarily tall, right? Like, does this serve a function that is important enough to warrant that it competes with the focal point here, right? I don't think so. And so it's like we need to find a way to retain the identity of this, but make it sure that the importance remains here. And so that's kind of like my attempt at that. We're just lowering it, but keeping the identity. Another thing to note too is that this is actually all still possible. Like the geo that I've edited here only needs to be adjusted in terms of height, and all the gameplay stuff is still remains intact. Okay. Even the walls that got lowered here, everything is fine. Um, so yeah, so that's the goal, right? Is we're hiding things until we hit the big reveal and it becomes very, very clear what we're supposed to be looking at. Very simple solution, right? At least for this particular shot. It's like really just editing two things. But we're not done yet. Because what I also did to change this composition was lower the mid building, right? And that's where it starts to get tricky, right? And you start to realize that everything affects each other and everything is connected, right? Because this mid building camp in the original comes up quite a bit, right? Um, and it covers most of that tower, which in my opinion, I'd like it to show more of it, right? Let's get a better view of it from this distance. So if we go over here and we look at this from flat view, show that, and then I'll show this. So the purpose of this concept here, or like the reason why I designed this building this way, was because when you're in Los Angeles and you're in LA downtown near the food court area, this is what you'll encounter, right? There's buildings like tower over you. They're very tall. It's very claustrophobic. So that was the attempt I was trying to get. And then the interior is the Bradbury building, like replica, right? Not replica, but that's what it's trying to be. So that's also contributes to what's why the height is there. But playing with it more, I realized that it doesn't need to be that tall, and we can do something like this and retain all the information that we have inside and reduce the height to help with the composition in other areas, right? Something to note too is like I would ignore all the interior detailing here because like in order to improve that, I remove this horizontal bar, I remove the windows here. I'd probably even take this horizontal line right here and drop it down to help with the proportion of like the thirds that are happening, right? Or like, well, it wouldn't be a third if I remove this, but even still, I would drop this vertical bar down to help with proportions. So ignore that, but the height of it I think works better. And then I drop this down too so that we can start to open up the space this way and let the gameplay space kind of breathe, right? Because when you start to open that up, you'll realize, okay, you get some cool opportunities for like murals that can be placed here now that we can see because we drop down this wall. And when you drop down the wall, you also notice you get a better view of the tower now from mid, right? Like as you're a defender and the prior to the round starting, you can really get a good view of that that like important element on the map, right? Like it's one of the most important things, and we actually can't see it that well from too many places on the map, right? So when you drop this down, you get a better view of that, and that is all because we're doing composition adjustments that are on the entire other side of the map, right? So everything is connected, and it's important to consider how our decisions that we make when we're concepting from player view affect the greater whole when we are looking at the map from like other angles, right? So that's why it's important, and that's why I'm stressing that we really work in these big chunks, and we also work with 3D so that we're not, you know, designing something like where we're doing this or this, and then we don't realize that it like really affects the composition from, this angle, or like when we're, like here or something, right? Just as an example. So hopefully that's clear. Again, when we took this angle and we realized that there's multiple different things that are contributing to the problem, and all of these things, even way over here, can have ramifications like our decision making. Okay.